All right. Hello. Good evening. Oh. Oh, you have a black screen instead of me. Well, can't have that, can we? Got to see my ugly mug on there. All right. Continuing on with everything's backwards. Forbidden history. We have, let's see, I think we started into another section, didn't we? Oh, we did last time. We started into section 2, making the case for catastrophism, earth changes, sudden and gradual. And we read the 4th and 5th articles. So we're going to start off with number 6, the case for the flood. That could be interesting. So we'll just kick on back here. And yeah, jump into it. Hopefully we'll get some more people coming in. If not, you know, let's see, how long is this one? 2, 3. It's about 8 pages. And then we've got something about Emmanuel Velikovsky. That could be interesting too. And that's another 7 pages. We'll see. I should be able to get through both of them. All right. I know we're starting a few minutes late. All right. The Case for the Flood, Exposing the Scientific Myth of the Ice Age by Peter Bross. Those people who are not satisfied with the paradigms supported by the scientific establishment regarding the creation of the universe are naturally interested in Plato's story of Atlantis, a prehistoric civilization destroyed in a flood. We are all aware of the degree of opposition the story creates in the scientific community. Atlantis is up there with flying saucers and free energy devices as targets for the skeptics who are organized to perpetuate entrenched scientific dogma. Because it raises the specter of an actual source for the thousands of seemingly impossible megalithic remains, including the pyramids that dot the surface of the earth. Graham Hancock, in his book Underworld, The Mysterious Origins of Civilization, visits the remains of prehistoric worldwide civilization using the monuments it left behind. Okay, okay. He posits that this worldwide culture was brought to an end by superfloods. Robert M. Schoch, Ph.D., contends in Voyages of the Pyramid Builders, The True Origins of the Pyramids from Lost Egypt to Ancient America, that the geological, linguistic, and geographical evidence associated with the worldwide megalithic monuments demonstrates the actual existence of such a prototype civilization, a civilization that was dispersed around the globe by rising sea levels caused by a flurry of comets. While the edges of evidence appear to support the notion of Atlantis as a worldwide, man, can't get my mouth to work tonight, as a worldwide civilization lost in a catastrophic flood, many authors have sought out Atlantis in specific locales because the scientific establishment unknowingly cast its lot against a prehistorical civilization before the evidence began showing up. It did so by enforcing the 18th century rule of reason, which stipulated that God could not be used as an explanation for physical reality, thereby rejecting out of hand the possible validity of all biblical accounts and, in the case of a worldwide prehistoric society, the possibility that a flood of biblical proportions destroyed all but the megalithic evidence for that civilization. Making the of science safe against Bible thumpers became the overriding goal of 19th century science. Pierre-Simon de Laplace had barely finished banishing God as the source of Newton's perpetual motion of the solar system by creating his swirling mass of gas out of whole cloth before evidence for the worldwide flood described in the Bible began to accumulate. Science at this time was unaware that accounts of a universal flood appear around the globe. The universal flood being a part of the myths and traditions of more than 500 widely separated cultures. Isn't that interesting? 500 different cultures have a story of a flood. As explorers started to bring home descriptions of the world from afar, science was horrified to see a picture emerging of a planet scarred by massive movements of water, generally from the northwest to the southeast, over its surface. The northwestern side of whole mountains were scored as if they had been subjected to fast-moving waters containing gravel and boulders. Floodwater was unmistakably the source of the scoring because science could see the same effect from fast-moving rivers. Furthermore, those same sides of the mountains were also home to massive buildups of drift materials, detritus presumably left behind by receding waters. Again, this was an effect that mimicked natural actions in the real world. These drift deposits even contained the remains of animals, including the woolly mammoth. More horrifying to 19th century scientists than the evidence of water damage and silting were the gigantic boulders exposed to public view all over the European countryside in places where they clearly didn't belong. Those oversized rocks, many weighing thousands of tons, could have been moved only by massive floodwaters carrying them along and then depositing them when the waters receded. The movement of these rocks by the floodwaters would have been in part responsible for the aforementioned mountainside scouring. What to do with these discoveries that constituted irrefutable evidence of a worldwide flood? If science had been true to the evidence and concluded that the evidence had in fact resulted from a worldwide flood, religious crazies would have filled the pulpits and newspapers with cries that the biblical story of the flood, and thus the entire Bible, had been scientifically confirmed, not a desirable result. The only thing science had going for it was the lack of an apparent source for the floodwaters. Arguments that its waters had originated from the visible seabeds and ocean floors of the moon were easily squelched by referring to Newton's theory of gravitation, which holds that gravity is proportional to matter. All the matter in the moon that has ever been there appears still to be there. Thus, there could have been no lessening of the gravity, and thus no way for the moon's apparent seas and oceans to have escaped its gravity and moved the 250,000 miles across space in response to the Earth's stronger gravity and produce a worldwide flood. I have never heard that theory. That is bizarre. That water from the moon caused the flood? Wow. That is... I don't know what those people were smoking, but I'd say I disagree with them. Okay. Science, however... Let me make sure, did I... Yep, okay. Science, however, is an enterprise that turns beliefs into facts, and it accomplishes this feat so well that its myths become more real than actual facts. It takes hypotheses, mere notions, and crafts a methodology designed to do the impossible, to turn those notions into facts. Science holds that hypotheses that predict facts that are later found are as good as fact. Unfortunately, I have to kind of agree with that, to some extent. The scientific landscape is littered with hypotheses that have been accepted as scientific fact, even though the term scientific fact is an admission that proven hypotheses are not facts. There is nothing that can be done to turn an idea into a fact. The scientific process merely accepts theories as scientific fact as long as they have not been disproved. Of course, what we have when we accept as fact ideas that have never been disproved are a bunch of ideas that have never been disproved. Laplace's I'm not sure because it's the French name. It's Laplace if you want to just Americanize it. Swirling mass of gas, light as water waves, the oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle, the electron, even Newton's mass gravity are scientific facts, ideas capable of neither proof nor disproof. The task that faced science when it was confronted with the incontrovertible evidence of a worldwide flood was to create a scientific fact that would provide a substitute for the already existing evidence left behind by the actual flood. In the early 1920s, a Swiss engineer, Ignaz Venetz, focused on the remains of woolly mammoths found in the drifts, pointing out that as the same animals were being found in the frozen Siberian wastes, the area in which the drifts were found must have at one time been covered with ice. A chorus of experts joined in, positing the slow descent of glaciers from the north, a process that, because it visualized the inexorable creep of ice over eons, deftly captured the spirit of uniformitarianism. Charles Lyell's theory, published in the 1830s, which maintains that geologic processes occur gradually rather than catastrophically. Lyell's own reconstruction of the Earth's history, focusing on the layers of sediment left as the floodwaters receded, pictured the sediments as deposited over eons so that they could be used to produce a fictitious dating system for the Earth to counter the biblical creation story. A decade later, the Swiss naturalist Louis Agassiz consolidated the speculations of Venetz, and his chorus of approving voices by enthroning himself as the inventor of the Ice Age. Agassiz's creation for scientific and public consumption was a distinct reversal of the scientific process. Instead of taking an idea and using unknown facts to prove it to be a scientific fact, Agassiz took disparate facts that led inexorably to an uncomfortable conclusion, a worldwide flood, and then created an idea, the Ice Age, that could be used in place of the uncomfortable flood idea. And then he exclaimed his Ice Age theory to be a scientific fact. Hello. Because no methodology can prove an idea, ideas have to be accepted or rejected on the basis of the evidence they explain. The glacier theory did not explain why the scoring labeled striations that supported glacier theory appeared only on one side of the mountains, or why the drifts called moraines, to tie them to glacier theory, contained the remains of animals that were found only in equatorial regions, insects that were found only in the southern hemisphere, and birds that were native to Asia. The glacier theory did not explain why the giant boulders named erratics to accommodate glacier theory were found in desert regions where no glacier could possibly go. But these discrepancies were small potatoes compared to the scientific reality of glaciers themselves. Glacier theory simply ignored the basic facts of glacier movement. Glaciers are flows of ice that, like rivers, respond to gravity. Glaciers do not climb hills and they do not travel across level land. However, because scientific facts are merely notions, ideas that cannot be disproved, those who present strong visual confirmation of their truthfulness are always both widely and wildly accepted. Even though glaciers could not have carried the erratics the thousands of miles required to reach and cover the European countryside, the fact that the North Pole was north, which was up there on the globe, was more than ample scientific proof that gravity could cause the glaciers to inch down over the sides of the globe. No one proposed that ice fields covered the southern half of the planet because that would require the glaciers to defy gravity and travel up the sides of the globe from the South Pole. Such is the stuff upon which empirical science bases its notions of reality. You can tell this person really does not like the scientific fields. And, you know, for some good reasons, kind of making light of their explaining away things. But like Laplace or Laplace's swirling mass of gas, which was proposed 4 decades before Agassiz's Ice Age and provided the template for turning theories about existing facts into scientific facts, the Ice Age is no more than a proposition, a possible explanation for the reality that we see. Science saw the evidence of the flood described in the Bible and created the Ice Age to avoid the appearance of verifying an event described in the Bible. Once the Ice Age was accepted as a reality, the only problem that science encountered was its need to produce a model that would explain how the Earth could undergo vast temperature variations, a task at which it has failed so far. In the meantime, subsequent discoveries continued to verify the existence of a worldwide flood and mirrored the hundreds of newly encountered myths and traditions attesting to the flood's actuality. The very drifts that contained the bones of the woolly mammoths of the Ice Age contained, along with the remains of exotic animals, insects, and birds that had never lived in the same location, and vegetation that could never have been local to where the drifts were found. There was no way to explain this admixture of life by glacial movements. It is as if all the creatures, all the trees, all the vegetation of the earth had been caught up in flowing whirlpools, mixed together, and then deposited wherever the water settled. In addition to the drifts at the northwest bases of the mountain chains, these jumbles of diverse life forms were also found in drifts that filled isolated valleys and made up entire islands in the Arctic, whose boneyards contained not only the remains of animals from warmer climes, but also uncountable tree trunks extirpated with their roots intact, trees that could have grown only below the Arctic tree line. Science did not rush to proclaim the existence of a warm age. Instead, as soon as the Ice Age became a scientific fact, the fossil remains of life that had been found in the drifts, including the woolly mammoth that gave rise to the myth of the Ice Age, disappeared from scientific discourse, and the newly named moraines became a simple admixture of sand and rock. When the same admixture of bones and plant life was found stuffed deep in caves, a process that could have occurred only if it had been carried into the small cracks and crevices by the recession of massive floodwaters, the caves were deemed an anomaly that explained nothing, and the evidence was allowed to be mined into non-existence. Where have we heard that before? The whole premise of Forbidden Archaeology, the book I've mentioned several times, is that a whole lot of evidence is just mined into non-existence because it's inconvenient. Then came evidence that the scattered islands of the Pacific had once been home to a civilization that had stretched from the shores of Asia to the coast of South Africa. Plato's accounts of a lost civilization in the Timaeus and Critias had always been the subject of debate, but the debate had not arisen because of physical evidence on the face of the earth. The pyramids, impossible structures, had always existed, but there was never a context in which to place them until the discoveries of ancient cities in the Pacific and then in Central and South America started coming to light. Similarities among the various megalithic societies being uncovered, led to the application of the word diffusion to describe the way culture passes from one group of people to another. With cultural diffusion, again pointing clearly to an antediluvian civilization. The scientific establishment reacted, and archaeology's first rule, the ironclad law that cultural transfers could not extend beyond the shores of the oceans. At the same time, a social movement was forged that was designed to preserve the dignity of indigenous populations in the face of the encroachment of modern technology. In the United States, the late 19th century job of establishing that native populations had never been influenced by foreign contact fell to Major John Wesley Powell, who was the creator and director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian, a founder and president of the politically influential Cosmos Club, a founder and president of the Anthropological Society of Washington, one of the earliest members of the Biological Society of Washington, an organizer of the Geological Society of Washington, a founder of both the National Geographic Society and the Geological Society of America, the president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. During the 19th century, evidence of both European presence and the existence of a prehistoric civilization was being uncovered all over North America, primarily in the mounds that dotted the countryside east of the Rockies. Powell sent out his ethnology emissaries to systematically destroy the mounds and any evidence they contained that pointed to non-native origins, thereby successfully eradicating the history of the North American continent. Powell's prestige and fanaticism, together with the law against cultural diffusionism, translated into a worldwide rule of science that megalithic structures, no matter where found, were the product of whatever local inhabitants happened to live around the megaliths at the time of their discovery. Thus the world was taught that the pyramids sprang from the hands of hunter-gatherers who had discovered farming on the shores of the Nile. The massive megalithic complexes in the Americas were the product of the ancestors of the natives Cortez had quickly defeated, and the megalithic monuments dotting the islands of the Pacific were built by the natives' ancestors, who had set aside their fishing spears long enough to craft cities out of fitted slabs of 50-ton rocks. There was no room in the past for a megalithic society, a worldwide antediluvian civilization that would easily explain both the physical remains of such a civilization and the flood that brought that civilization to an end. The past was dominated by an ice age created to explain the evidence for the flood that destroyed the worldwide civilization. Today, we are stuck with the scientific fact, the myth, that ice can creep down from the North Pole and cover Europe and North America. Once the scientific community has accepted a theory as fact, any evidence is acceptable as long as it is cast to support the theory, and no evidence is sufficient to disprove the theory. Without opposition, the theory becomes part of the founding principles of whole new fields of inquiry. There can then be no agassiz speaking into a void created by an overwhelming desire to discredit an event described in the Bible, nor a Powell powerful enough to undo the damage done by Powell. This is because there is no longer a steward overseeing the entire field, given that the field itself is now fractured into dozens of disciplines whose disciples can all take responsibility for claiming the theory to be wrong. If and when people in the individual fields who have adopted the scientific fact of the Ice Age attempt to challenge the theory, they are charged with operating out of their area of competence. The Ice Age is more real than the striated rock, the moraine-buried mountains, and the erratics, I don't know, it was crafted to explain a non-existent vision that is more a visible mixture of the landscape than the landscape itself. But the discoveries of flood evidence keep coming. The breathtaking ruins of a submerged city off Yonaguni Island in Japan have produced a storm of controversy, which has been drowned out by the cries of rage against the latter discovery of the remains of a huge underwater city lying off the western tip of Cuba, just east of the Yucatan. Before critics could scream themselves hoarse at the discovery, another startling find of a sunken city in India's Bay of Cambay sent establishment delusionists into the Harvard archaeologist Richard Meadows, scrambling for an international commission to gain control of the nature of the knowledge permitted to come out of these finds. Interesting. Wanting to censor the evidence and being kind of blatant about it. Any researcher attempting to come to grips with the emerging facts of the past is faced with the scientifically unassailable reality of the Ice Age in trying to explain the facts, and by acknowledging the Ice Age ends up further distorting our view of reality. Some seize on the crustal displacement theory suggested by Charles Hapgood and fleshed out by the Flem-Aths. The notion that parts of the Earth that are now at the poles were further toward the equator, speculating that such an event would have caused massive movement of the world's oceans. Others favor the idea that giant comets or meteors caused the Earth to tilt on its axis, thus displacing the oceans. Still others believe the encroachment of black holes caused the oceans to heave. The most effective proponent of a worldwide civilization Graham Hancock perceives that the melting ice sheets created massive water dams in accordance with Ice Age theory proposed by the late Professor Cesare Emiliani. These dams, Hancock posits, broke and produced the superfloods that inundated what became the underwater cities. Because these explanations accord reality to the scientific myth of the Ice Age and do not explain where the waters of the flood came from, the waters whose weight submerged the land masses of the Pacific and the Atlantic, forcing up mountain peaks at their margins, I prefer to look elsewhere than the Earth for the source of the floodwaters. The most obvious source, of course, would be the Moon, whose seabeds outlined on its surface have long been recognized by their names as being the remnants of seas and oceans. Okay, so this guy is positing that the water came from the ocean, from the Moon? Okay. Let us speculate for a moment and say that the scientific fact of gravity, rather than being the static result of mass, is the dynamic product of what the matter is doing, that is, cooling. This is a conclusion that is supported by the fact that the measurement of the product of cooling, the electromagnetic emissions such as light, is identical to the measurement of gravity, and both diminish inversely with the square of their distance. Given this, the Moon, being smaller than Earth, would have cooled off first, lessening its gravitational field and allowing the still hot Earth, with its still strong gravitational field, to attract the Moon's oceans across space. I don't know, sounds like a lot of science fiction to me. But okay, let's keep on going. Attempting to disagree with the nature of the static gravity that causes the masses of ice to slip slowly down the sides of the planet, in our view, is a bigger sin than claiming that the billion pounds of copper mined in Upper Michigan during the Mediterranean Bronze Age produced the Bronze Age. Gravity is a property rather than a dynamic process, and North American copper could not have crossed the ocean. We're faced with a scientific process that turns ideas into facts that, once accorded consensus reality, are beyond challenge because, with no evidence for their validity, there can be no evidence for their invalidity. The Ice Age was crafted out of whole cloth to counter the possibility that evidence turning up all over the world could be used to support biblical interpretations of the world. No one wants to go back to the days of feudal science when decisions about reality were filtered through belief systems designed to provide for our salvation. However, we have created a scientific system that enshrines off-the-cuff ideas of men who lived before we knew about the atom, electricity, or even that some stars were galaxies. In short, we are allowing our views of reality to be controlled by the unverifiable notions of dead men who knew relatively nothing. Because the project of science is no longer unified, but is instead splintered among 1,000 different disciplines, these embedded ideas creep into diverse disciplines unchallenged, and in doing so become unchallengeable. If we don't consciously challenge basic assumptions at every step of the way, those of us involved in seeking explanations for the actual reality of our existence, in this case the evidence for a worldwide antediluvian civilization, will find ourselves trapped in the very paradigm we are attempting to penetrate. Well now, I am going to lean somewhat to the side of that guy's a little bit of a crackpot. Um, I just no. Um, now he's talking about some stuff as though it's brand new. And remember, these are from articles I believe that came out in the late 90s, if I remember right. I think I looked in the beginning of the book, and I think it was published in the mid to late 90s. Oh no, I'm sorry. 2005 is when this was actually printed. So the articles could be, 5-10 years older than that. It does. The Atlantis Rising's been around a long time. Um, well, let's say they're 20-year-old articles. Well, a lot's been discovered since then, and newer theories have come out. I have never heard the theory of the water jumped off the moon and came and flooded the Earth. That to me sounds like something that is up there with flat Earth and um, some of the really fringed intelligent design theories. Intelligent design, I think they're reaching a bit on a lot of their stuff, but um, they are very much trying to prove the existence of God by proving that evolution couldn't have happened by accident, that it had to have some hand in it, and that to them would be God. Um, that's kind of where that comes from for me, or where that guy's coming from, is almost like God decided to bring the water from the moon down and flood the earth because he couldn't just create the water, which if he created the whole of existence, he could have created the water. So I don't know. Anyway, it's a weird theory. I think it's kind of a crackpot theory. Um, he keeps bringing up Graham Hancock, and his current theory, to the best of my knowledge, is that the ice caps, or at least part of them, were melted by the impact of um, not asteroids, comets. If comets impacted, they're mostly ice. So if they hit and melted the ice caps, they also would have melted, and it would have caused massive flooding. To me, that's more plausible than the moon's water came down and defied gravity, and yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. Although, hey, since part of the reason I'm doing this series is to say, how could you use this in your um, TTRPGs? You could have something like that. It's your world. Physics doesn't have to work the same way. So you could have that. You could have that even. You could be it could be a cause for a cataclysm. It could be part of your creation myth, your end times myth. Um, I don't know. It's giving me some ideas that I'm going to write down about stuff to include in games. In fact, let me quickly type a note, if you don't mind. Um, I actually typed up a couple of notes from last time too about the um, Brahma breathing out the universe, or breathing the universe into existence on the exhale, and then inhaling and destroying it. If you don't remember that one, watch the last episode, um, or read about the Brahman myth from Hinduism. Um, Okay, good enough. Let me save that. And um, the quarter after, I was really stumbling and having trouble reading that one. I'm not sure I want to jump into another one, even though it's about Velikovsky. And I'm very interested. Let's see. Give me a second here. Well, you know what? Yeah, let's go ahead and read it. That way we can finish up the second section next time, and then we'll be on to section 3, which is, let me see, section 3 is going to be articles exploring the greater antiquity of civilization. So it'll be stuff like the enigma of India's origins, pushing back the portals of civilization, new studies confirm very old Sphinx, um, the keys to understanding the wisdom of the ancients, fingerprints of the gods. Um, so that's going to be about Graham Hancock again. Central American Mystery, Destination Galactic Center. Yeah, so we'll finish this one so that not next week, but the week after we'll start into those. All right. So the martyrdom of Emmanuel Velikovsky. As catastrophists gain ground, an early hero gets some long overdue credit by John Kettler. We may not realize it, but we're going through the death throes of a fundamental geological doctrine, a doctrine called uniformitarianism, which holds that the geological processes we see today are the same ones that have always existed, and that while changes do occur, the process is gradual, unfolding over eons. Right. Try telling that one to your children. They've been steeped in classes through TV and movies in an altogether more radical view of how things work, geologically speaking. That model is called catastrophism and is exemplified by the now famous asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. Yes, we're talking about the Chicxulub crater in the Yucatan, and an asteroid strike some 65 million years ago. In 1950, this was the rankest sort of scientific heresy. The chief heretic was a man named Emmanuel Velikovsky, a man who made vast contributions to a variety of disciplines, but who today is all but unknown, even to many who benefit directly from his pioneering work. Emmanuel Velikovsky was a Russian Jew born June 10th, 1895, in Vitebsk. He mastered several languages as a child and graduated from gymnasium, high school, in 1913 with a gold medal, having performed exceptionally well in Russian and mathematics. He then left Russia for a time, traveled to Europe and Palestine, and took natural sciences pre-med courses at the University of Edinburgh. He returned to what was the then Tsarist Russia before World War I started, and enrolled in the University of Moscow. Somehow he was not swept up in either the slaughter on the Eastern Front or the Civil War when the Bolsheviks came to power in 1917, and he emerged with a medical degree in 1921 and also a strong background in history and law. Shortly thereafter, he moved to Vienna, where Cupid's arrow found him, resulting in his marriage to Elisheva Kramer, a young violinist. While in Vienna, he edited the Scripta Universitatis, a major academic work to which Albert Einstein contributed with mathematical physical science section. Contributed the mathematical physical science section. He also studied psychoanalysis under Sigmund Freud's pupil, Wilhelm Stekel, and studied the working of the brain in Zurich. In 1924, Velikovsky and his wife were living in Palestine, where he practiced psychoanalysis. He continued his academic editing work by taking on the Scripta Academica Hierosolimitana, a major Jewish piece of scholarship. The year 1930 saw his first original contribution in the form of a paper that argued that epileptics are characterized by pathological distinctive encephalogram patterns. A portion of his writings appeared in Freud's Imago. It was Freud's Moses and monotheism, though, that would plant the fateful seed that led Emmanuel Velikovsky from the quiet pursuits of healing minds and organizing great thoughts to worldwide fame. 10 years of academic ostracism and a subsequent lifetime of vilification and scorn. The seed was a nagging wondering whether Freud's hero, the monotheistic iconoclast pharaoh Akhenaten, might be the real-life model for the Oedipus, the legendary individual whose strange desires and worse acts were said by the Freudians to underlie the psychology of all young men. Velikovsky later argued in Oedipus and Akhenaten that Akhenaten was indeed the real-life model for the tragic and legendary Oedipus. In 1939, Velikovsky went on sabbatical for a year and took his family with him to the United States, only weeks before World War II began. He spent the next 8 months doing research in the great libraries of New York. April 1940 brought another key question to the fore of Velikovsky's questioning mind, a mind well trained in ancient history and steeped in the... Wait a minute. Hold on. I gotta look at something here. Is that right? He was born in 1895? Oh, okay. He went into university in 1917. It's like, wait a minute. How young was he? Sorry, it just jumped into my brain. April 1940 brought another key question to the fore of Velikovsky's questioning mind, a mind well trained in ancient history and steeped in the Hebrew faith. Was there any evidence in Egyptian records of the great catastrophes that were depicted in the Bible as preceding the Exodus? Velikovsky went looking and came up with what is known as the Papyrus Ipuwer, a set of lamentations by an Egyptian sage by the name of Ipuwer that describe a series of disasters that befell his beloved country, disasters that match those described in the book of Exodus. The source of the well-known description that first appeared in the King James Version of hail and burning hail that destroyed Egypt's crops. This rather amazing bombardment is the result of human interference, you see. The King James Version of the Bible dates back to the 1600s, and it wasn't until the middle to late 1700s that a scientific concept for meteorite even existed. Thus, when the translators encountered the Hebrew barad stone in early manuscripts, they elected to render it as hail. Velikovsky noticed description after description in myths and legends and historical accounts of burning pitch falling from the heavens, and from this he proceeded to develop deep insights into the nature and structure of Venus. More on this later. The discovery of the papyrus Ipuwer launched Velikovsky on nothing less than an attempt to reconcile the conflicting Hebrew and Egyptian chronologies, an effort that eventually led to academic war with Egyptologists, archaeologists, and ancient historians when he published Ages in Chaos, Revised Chronology. In 1952, and Earth in Upheaval, wherein he presented geological and paleontological evidence for worlds in collision. In 1955, period. A titanic clash with the full force of astronomers, cosmologists, experts in celestial mechanics, and academicians ensued when Velikovsky presumed to upset their tidy model of an orderly, highly stable cosmos by publishing his bombshell Worlds in Collision in 1950. The key idea from which the book arose came about in October 1940 when Velikovsky, reading the book of Joshua, noticed that a shower of meteorites preceded the sun's standing still. This made him wonder whether this might be a description not of a local event, but of a global one. He went looking for evidence in history and archaeology, and also in the myths, legends, and repressed memories of all humanity. His psychoanalytical training standing him in excellent stead here. What he found indicated to him that the planet Venus had been the major player in a series of global cataclysms recorded all over the world. It also made him wonder whether Venus could be related to the upheavals preceding the Exodus. For 10 years, Velikovsky, now a permanent resident of the United States, continued to research his two manuscripts, meanwhile trying to find a publisher for Worlds in Collision. 24 rejections later, the Macmillan Company, a major publisher of academic textbooks, agreed to take on his book. The scientists who wrote Macmillan's books and the academics who bought them applied blatant pressure tactics in an attempt to prevent Macmillan from publishing the book, but Macmillan was not dissuaded. And yet, by the time that Worlds in Collision had become Macmillan's #1 bestseller, the pressure had become so great that Macmillan ended up transferring the book to its competitor Doubleday. At Doubleday, the book went on to enjoy worldwide success that was aided considerably by a public backlash against the pressure tactics. Interesting. Velikovsky has been on my book list for decades, and I've just never gotten to him. We just might have to include those two books in these readings. Let me know what y'all think. I think it would be great. God, they're over 70 years old now. Internationally famous, scientifically damned. Worlds in Collision was a bomb detonated in the China shop of astronomy, whose tidy model of the stable solar system in no way provided for planets departing their orbits and wreaking worldwide havoc even once, let alone several times. In briefest form, Velikovsky's argument was that Venus hadn't always been a planet. Instead, he posited it had been ejected as a comet from the body of Jupiter and had a highly eccentric orbit that had either caused it to collide directly with Earth or had several times brought it close enough to Earth to trigger cataclysms that laid waste to entire kingdoms all around the globe before settling down. The arguments in the book also maintain that there were records of this having occurred within historical times. Consider why the controversy regarding the book's publication erupted. It was 1950, and the United States, having triumphed in World War II, was enjoying incredible prosperity and optimism. The people, perhaps reacting to all the chaos and horror of the recently ended war and the perceived rising menace of global communism, Soviets had suddenly gotten the bomb in 1949, largely closed ranks, went back to work, and resumed their lives or started new ones. Emphasis was on patriotism, conformity, and consumption. How ironic, then, that the public, in its backlash against the book's suppression, turned out to be more open-minded than what was presumed to be the open minds of I think it's supposed to be academia and science, but it's misspelled. That's how it was, though. Reader's Digest, that citadel of American conservatism, said of Velikovsky's seminal work, fascinating as a tale by Jules Verne, yet documented with a scholarship worthy of Darwin. The New York Herald Tribune called it a stupendous panorama of terrestrial and human histories, and Pageant beautifully summarized the public reaction by saying, "Nothing in recent years has so excited the public imagination." The above are all review excerpts taken from the back cover of the Dell paperback edition. In its 11th printing by 1973, the date of the writer's copy. The Dell paperback first went into print in 1967, some 17 years after Worlds in Collision was first published in hardcover. The scientific and academic reaction to the book was generally presaged by the presaged. I've never known how to pronounce that that word. By the extortion practiced prior to and after publication against the Macmillan Company. As the book began to garner public and, in some circles, even scientific interest and acclaim, all pretense of genteel discussion went by the boards. Out came the mailed fists, the naked threats, and oceans of mud and offal. The attacks targeted three main groups: the public, the scientific and academic community, and Emmanuel Velikovsky himself. Nor were such niceties as actually reading the book before denouncing it and its author employed. Boy, where have we heard that before? Even before the Macmillan Company published the book, the renowned astronomer Harlow Shapley arranged multiple intellectual well poisonings in a learned journal by an astronomer, a geologist, and an archaeologist, not one of whom had read the book. This was a pattern used over and over again. And the reason I say where have we heard that before is in our own current news, so many people condemn others and they've never even read their book, watched their video, listened to them at all. They know nothing about them. They're just being told they're bad people, and therefore they're bad people. So exact same thing was going on pre-internet. Even before the Macmillan Company published the book, the renowned astronomer Harlow Shapley arranged multiple intellectual... Okay, I read that. This was a pattern used over and over again. Shapley and his minions also engineered the sacking of the veteran senior editor, 25 years at the Macmillan Company, who had accepted Worlds in Collision for publication. Shapley was also responsible for the director of the famous Hayden Planetarium being fired for the high crime of proposing to mount a display at the planetarium on Velikovsky's unique cosmological theory. Meanwhile, Velikovsky was systematically attacked in the scientific journals via distortion, lies, misrepresentation, claims of incompetence, and ad hominem attacks, while there never seemed to be space in which he could reply in order to defend himself. Interestingly, one of Velikovsky's attackers was the astronomer Donald Benzel. since identified through the UFO research Stanton Friedman's digging to be a highly cleared disinformation specialist during World War II. Donald Menzel was a major UFO debunker, but his name is one of those on the famous notorious top secret code word MJ12 document, where he is listed as composing part of the super covert investigative team for the July 1947 Roswell crash, alleged technology from which was discussed in an Atlantis Rising magazine article entitled "The Fight for Alien Technology." Jack Shulman remains undaunted by mounting threats. Let's look now at some of Velikovsky's then shocking claims and see whether he got anything right. Velikovsky's claims are in bold. Velikovsky's claim, Venus is hot. Correct. Velikovsky argued that Venus was incandescent in historical times and would therefore still be hot. Venusian cloud temperature measurements in 1950 showed temperatures well below freezing day and night. In 1962, NASA's Mariner 2 satellite showed the surface temperature to be 800 degrees Fahrenheit, more than enough to melt lead. Surface probes later determined the true value to be about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Second claim, a large comet was in collision with Earth. Correct. Even before the famous Chicxulub, I have no idea how to pronounce that, the Yucatan impact site, story became public knowledge, researchers had found in August 1950 rich deposits of meteoric nickel in the red clay of ocean bottoms, and in March 1959 had found a layer of deep-sea white ash deposited in a cometary collision, or the fiery end of the bodies of cosmic origin. Next claim. Some cometary tails and also some meteorites contain hydrocarbons. Correct. By 1951, spectral analysis disclosed hydrocarbons in comet tails. In 1959, hydrocarbons in meteorites were found to be composed of many of the same waxes and compounds found here on Earth. Claim. Evidence of petroleum hydrocarbons will be found on the Moon. Correct. Samples brought back by the Apollo 11 mission had evidence of organic matter in the form of aromatic hydrocarbons. Interesting. Claim. Jupiter emits radio noises. Velikovsky made this claim at Princeton in 1953. 18 months later, two scientists from the Carnegie Institute announced receiving strong radio signals from Jupiter, then considered a cold body and shrouded in thousands of miles of ice. By 1960, two Caltech scientists on Jupiter had a radiation belt around it that was emitting 1,014 times more radio energy than Earth's Van Allen belt. Quite a few lucky guesses and coincidences, wouldn't you say? Let's now turn to Velikovsky's single greatest crime, which not only put him in the soup but also kept him there, his interdisciplinary investigations. Velikovsky, interdisciplinary scientific heretic. Dr. Lynn Rose, writing in Pensée, Velikovsky Reconsidered, in an article entitled "The Censorship of Velikovsky's Interdisciplinary Synthesis," noted an automatic tendency towards uniformitarianism in all the scientific disciplines. This condition was born of a profound ignorance concerning evidence of catastrophism found by other disciplines, leading to the ignoring or rejecting of such evidence within any particular discipline. As Dr. Rose put it, quote, each isolated discipline tends to remain unaware of the catastrophic data hidden away in skeletons in the closets of other disciplines. Velikovsky has removed these skeletons from various closets and has been rattling them loudly for all to hear. His suggestion is that when one looks at all the evidence without restricting oneself to the limited number of facts usually considered by one group of specialists, it becomes possible to make a strong case for catastrophism. End quote. To say Velikovsky's skeletal music was unwelcome to many would be putting it mildly. Said Dean B. McLaughlin, professor of astronomy at the University of Michigan, in his May 20, 1950 letter of protest and threat to the Macmillan Company, as quoted by Dr. Rose, quote, "The claim of universal efficacy is the unmistakable mark of the quack. There is a specialization within specialties, but no man today can hope to correct the mistakes in more than a small subfield of science. And yet Velikovsky claims to be able to dispute the basic principles of several sciences. These are indeed delusions of grandeur." End quote. Does this explain in part why Velikovsky was essentially crucified, then ostracized by most of the scientific community? Does this explain why he was harangued and ad nauseum at his day in court 24 years after Worlds in Collision was published? This day in court took the form of a special meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, held in San Francisco on February 25, 1974. It was arranged by Carl Sagan and had been promised to be a fair forum. Instead, it turned into a snide dismissal of Velikovsky, an unprincipled, many-on-one attack on a slow-speaking 79-year-old man deluged with the objections and assertions and given near zero time to respond. Velikovsky endured 2 sessions of this abuse, which lasted 7 hours, and while he managed to score some good points, to many who participated in this rigged event, he came across poorly. Nor was a key paper by Albert Michelson of speed of light measurement fame, which supported Velikovsky's arguments, allowed to be read before reporters left to file their stories. The stunning findings of planetary probes ended Velikovsky's college exile and overloaded his schedule. Velikovsky died still researching in 1979, leaving us a rich, published and unpublished body of work. So yeah, there you go. Velikovsky. The more I hear about him, the more I want to read his stuff. Whether people think it's quackery or not, I could care less. A lot of what I enjoy reading, people think is just a bunch of garbage. So there you go. They're part of the problem. They don't want to actually study the theories and even give them half a chance. So anyway, that's it. We'll finish up section 2 next time, our last 2 articles, and then that gets us into our 3, exploring the greater antiquity of civilization, which I think is going to take us about 3 sessions to get through as well. Let's see, how many articles do we have in that section? Seven articles in that section. So one night we might go late. So it starts 70. So that one's 9 pages. That one's 7 pages. That one's 6 pages. 10, 6, and 7. So probably the second section we'll jump in and we'll do 3 articles that time. Um, and then we get into searching for the fountainhead. Um, looks like stuff on Atlantis for the most part. Then ancient high technology. There's a bunch of articles in that section. And then section 6 is new models to ponder. Um, yeah. So, about the time we get into section 5, I'm going to start putting out a poll and see if people haven't given me suggestions on what they want to read next, or want me to read next, then I will put out a poll and just start gathering opinions, because I could go with 2 more books on science and religion from Atlantis Rising, the same kind of stuff, articles, or I can jump into any number of things on alternative history, the Masons, the occult, um, all kinds of stuff. So we'll get there when we get closer. Um, we'll put out the poll. All right. So that's it for this time. I'm going to take a quick break, and then I will come back for a little another stream playing some Fallout 3. So um, if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, please still leave your comments. I will see them and respond. Um, so see you in a little bit.